Okay, so we're at chapter 29 now. Remember, the whole section that we're in now is dealing with stuff that might impede on our joy. Because the ideal way to serve God is with joy, and there's stuff that could slow down our train of awesome. The last 3 chapters all had to do mainly with sadness, depression, things like that. If something comes and it weighs us down, then that impedes the joy. And there's 2 parts to it, in the way that I'm not happy now, I'm not serving God with joy, but also weighing us down can either get us into a negative cycle of just chasing after things that are not going to actually make us happy, so we just get stuck in this loop of bad behavior, habits, whatever you want to call it. And also, we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. We're not fighting the way we're supposed to. We become sluggish, lazy, feel sad, depressed, immobile, any of those things. So that's why we have to fight those things. And that's one thing that we have to figure out, whether it's on a physical level or a spiritual level, whatever it is, we have to figure it out. A lot of it just making sure that we have the right perspective on things, remembering who's really in charge, and remembering we shouldn't be upset when we fall short of expectations not applicable to ourselves. This chapter is starting a different thing about what else can impede joy. And it's impeding joy, which also means because we're not feeling joyful, energetic, full of life, etc., we're not engaging in the battle that we're supposed to be engaging in. Specifically because we're talking about a Davening. So a tzaddik doesn't necessarily have to worry about, because he's defeated, he's so much defeated, his nefesh habahamis, he doesn't have to worry about the nefesh habahamis suddenly rearing up with some sort of negative emotion that's going to impede his service. That's not the domain of a tzaddik. This is the domain of a Beni and Russia, etc. That even if their mind is in the right place and I'm doing all the stuff I'm supposed to be doing, but the problem that we have now is that the heart's not feeling it. And the heart is technically under the domain of the Beni in the sense of combating desires and temptations and things like that. So here, the negative forces try to act up by weighing us down with other things, as in last chapters with depression or a bad mood or something like that, sinking us in sadness. And here, what this chapter introduces is a heart that remains unaffected. So you could kind of use the word apathy, but Tanya uses a different phrase. It calls it timtum halev. See, timtum halev shenasa kaven, a dullness of the heart that makes the heart feel like stone, as in that it's not feeling anything. So what do we do if we have a heart that I'm not feeling it? I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but there's no feeling in any of it. How do we get through? The example that it starts off with here specifically is davening. I'm davening, but my heart's not reacting to the davening. Why davening specifically? Because davening is called avodah shebelev. It's called service of the heart. Why is davening called avodah shebelev? So for 2 reasons. One is that it takes place in the heart, as in that's kind of what we're targeting there, that we're trying to extend the intellect into the realm of the emotions to elicit love and fear of God. All that we've studied, davening is when we try to bring it to the next level. We're trying to take all that we have intellectually and bring it into the heart. And then also because the object of prayer is the heart itself, and in prayer we try to transform the nature of our heart. That's why davening is called the avodah shebelev. That's our time for working on ourselves in that specific regard. I'm davening and it's not coming through. I'm not feeling it. What are we supposed to do? So the answer that we have actually comes from the Zohar. I think the head of the academy in Gan Eden. So he tells us, what do we do when something like this occurs? Ad la salat bei nahar mevachin leichulu. Guvad la salat bei nahar nishmesa mevachin leichulu. A wooden beam which does not catch fire should be splintered, and similarly a body into which the light of the soul does not penetrate should be crushed. What does that mean? Not like what they used to do, rolling around in the snow because they're punishing their body because it was a physical being. It's not what it means. The general idea is that if you want to light a fire, so I have a log is wood, wood burns. If you try to set a flame to that log, it's not going to burn. It's too thick. There's too muchness there. There's too much materiality, physicality there for it to burn. So how do you get it to burn? You have to break it up into pieces. Chop it up. Through chopping it up, making it smaller, kind of splintering it, that's how it can actually catch fire. Now, just as a general idea for this chapter and the next chapter are a little bit of different kinds of chapters in Tanya because they're much harsher in their approach to things. Usually, you probably noticed it, there's been a very positive spin. Even when we talk about sin and what it does, it could go a way it separates someone. But we still end up talking about mitzvot, eternal, and all that sort of stuff. There's still a very upbeat kind of approach to all these things. These 2 chapters are much harsher sort of chapters, which seem a little bit incongruous with what Tanya is about. But what it is there's 2 levels for it. On a lesser level, there's still much applicability to it. But if you want to look at it at the more literal or deeper kind of level, it's because this is calling an extreme action. That we got to this point that it's not getting through. We need something much more extreme in order to fix this, to rectify this situation. That's why this is a little bit of a harsher kind of approach and chapter, but because that's how extreme the situation is, that the heart is not feeling. So what does it mean that we have to crush the body? What does it mean that we're splintering the wood, that we're making it smaller? How do we do that? So again, not the rolling in the snow method of approach. Because as a general idea, Chassidism does not view materiality as something evil in that regard. It's something that we have to bring along to help us, not evil that we have to absolutely destroy. Here, so it talks about Lev Nishbra, Ruach Nishbra. A broken heart leads to a broken spirit, which is a sitracha in the case of Beinim, the very man himself. Why do we talk about that we have to crush the body and things like that? So it's because for Beinani, his body is his reality. As in, the emphasis that he has, the focus that he has, is first on the material world, the physical world, then on the spiritual world. For example, Neshama shenasata bi taharahi. The soul which you gave within me is pure. We can see already from this, where it says Neshama shenasata bi taharahi, let's talk about the nefesh elokis. A Davening says, you gave me a soul. This soul that you gave me, it's a pure soul, etc. As in, there's me and then the soul that you gave me. A tzaddik doesn't see things like that. The tzaddik's reality, the tzaddik's life, is the nefesh elokis. The body is just secondary to it. For us, we have our body and we also have the nefesh elokis. What we're going to try to do eventually is try to break materiality's hold on ourselves. That's what we mean by trying to break the physical body. Not injuring the body, God forbid, but trying to break the physical material hold, that physicality, materiality has over us. Because for so long, we've made that the primary focus. What happened is that there's too much has built up. So example of a pipe. When a pipe gets clogged up, what do you do about that? The sink's backing up now. Well, because there's something in the pipe that's causing it to back up. So what do? You don't talk nice to it. You don't pour sugar down it. You have to break through the blockage. Break through the blockage, now the pipe will work properly. So when there's a buildup between our spiritual service and it's not getting down to the heart, or the intellect is not connecting to the heart, so there's kind of like this buildup there between the knowledge and the information that's being sent down, and then it's not reacting in the way that it's supposed to, there's something clogging it. What clogs it? What's the backup? The backup is all the materiality and the physicality that we've indulged in. That causes the backup, and that's what we have to break and splinter. The fact that we see our body and the physical life as being first. Now, what it looks like on a practical level is, again, because this is a harsher chapter, it goes pretty far about what that could look like practically. We're not necessarily going to get to that level of how deep it's going to go, because one thing you have to be very careful with these methods is that you don't become so effective that you end up back in depression. We're going to get to it where it's like, don't be so effective that you've actually put yourself back at risk of depression now. We have to be careful with that. Okay, so here's the general idea. Davening can still crave material pleasures, whether it's permitted or forbidden. But in the case of forbidden matters, they're made of sinful thoughts. And as written, but I am a worm and not a man. A human being who chooses to lower himself to the level of a worm is worse than a worm, for it is a worm by creation rather than by choice. This is something that we spoke about when it comes to sin, transgression, is that at the moment of transgression, a person falls lower than the gnat. The gnat comes before you because you fall lower than it. It can only be a gnat. That's what it's created to be. You've now fallen lower because you had a choice and you made the wrong choice. What's happening here? A person who realizes I'm not feeling anything. We have to break ourselves, is basically what Tanya says. I think there's also an idea that the Rebbe talks about. I think I heard this when Rebbe Shei's Tal was doing this chapter, so I don't know exactly where, I didn't catch where it's from. But the Rebbe said that in general, this is not a method that we rely upon too much these days, because our generation needs much more positive and uplifting stuff, and not necessarily this kind of crushing sort of approach to things. But this is Tanya. You can't totally disregard this. This is Tanya. It's applicable, but this is not our first choice. There is a way of doing this. I think if you personally feel like, or if you've spoken to someone or whatever, this is something that you need. There is a way to do this that's kind of less harsh and could possibly still be effective. Basically what happens is like this. How do we get to this whole worm thing? The person realizes there's a blockage, it's not coming through. The mind, the heart, you're supposed to have das, which leads to all the emotions, right? The 10 soul powers of these emotions and all that kind of stuff, and it's not happening. So what do? He has to have a very honest talk with himself. And basically say, now it goes very deep about this honest talk with himself, of saying, listen up, you think, oh, I'm doing so fine, oh, whatever, but no, you're not doing okay. You're not doing okay because this is not getting through to you. And let's be honest with ourselves. How many times did we have a chance to be running after Torah mitzvahs and we didn't run after it? What are we running after in our lives? We're pushing to the head of the buffet line so that we could get the extra hot dog or something like that. And the person, it calls it mar de chushbana, that we're supposed to be a master of accounts. And the Tanya goes through literally, if you can't figure out today and you haven't found something today that you did wrong, go to tomorrow, go the day before that, start from the day you were born and examine every single one of your thoughts, speech, and actions. What you're trying to do is humble yourself, trying to break through the arrogance of the sitra achla klipa that is dark in the light of the soul. So why say specifically a master of accounts? Because an employee comes to the store, what the goings on in the store, as in like all that in and out, whatever, they don't really care so much. They care, they have the job, they punch the clock and they get out. But when you own the business, you pay attention to every single aspect of that business. So it says you're supposed to be a master of accounts. Think of every single little thing you've ever done in your life. So that's why it gets pretty extreme, because that's pretty deep to go that far. But I think if we do like a lighter version of this, a less extreme version of this, I think for a lot of us, we can find something that's not so far back and that's not going to maybe hurt as much to think about. And then you got to sit and think about that for a second of, why did I do that? I think I'm always preaching about how good it is to give and da-da-da, whatever. You're trying to humble yourself. And here it talks about like, if you can't figure out whatever, it even says, you can even see from the Zohar that you should even go into your dreams to see if you have to, right? So again, this is not like a common method of approach for us to start analyzing our own dreams like this. Also, a lot of us don't necessarily have to get that far to figure out something we've done wrong. Was I really helpful with this? Did I really go out of my way for something? and really try to like, oh, I'm walking around like everything's whatever, but like, no, I'm not okay. As in spiritually, like, no, I'm not okay. Did I reach out to this person? I ignore this person? Am I really doing all the things that I'm preaching about, talking about, that I believe in? And all the thing that you're trying to do is the making of the self smaller, because that's how you humble and break through the sitra achra that's blocking the light of the soul kind of thing. So here it says that a person humbles himself, he will contemplate how often he has become a vehicle for impurity through thought, speech, and actions. Even if it's not sinful, it's still of the side of sitra achra because it's not holy. Yesterday, today, this morning, you were davening, and where was your brain during your davening? We don't even have to go to the dreams yet. Did you actually have full kavanah during davening? Oh, how come I'm not feeling anything? What do you mean, why you're not feeling anything? When was the last time your brain was actually in the right place while you were doing Torah mitzvahs? Did you spend 5 minutes even seeing what this passage that you're saying even means? Do you actually know what all the words that you're saying mean? Did you actually think about it? Did you clear your mind before you sat down to davening and try to learn a bit, get your mind in the right place? Or are you too busy thinking about how you're going out for donuts today, and that's where your brain was the whole time? It's the harsher measure because we have to put ourselves down, basically. And we're doing that specifically to humble this negative part of ourselves that has turned into, even unwittingly, has become something arrogant. And that arrogance is what blocks the light from coming through. That's what causes blockage. The only way to deal with that is to break through it, make it smaller. We have to chip it down. So we go through all the stuff that we've done to say, let's have a very honest talk with ourselves and say, I'm complaining that I'm not feeling anything, but what have I actually done to actually try to feel something? You're just going through the mitzvot by road. Of course you're not feeling anything. Where's the appreciation for what I'm doing? Where's the emphasis? Where's my mind during all this time? Again, I think we could do it on a lesser level if we feel like this is something important for us at a certain time. But to go to the extreme of it is not necessarily something that everyone can risk doing because we don't want to end up in a depressed state. Also, going back to the thought, speech, and action, we have this whole idea that when we do a mitzvah, our body becomes a chariot for God's will. The Avos were always a chariot. A chariot has no will of its own. It goes wherever the driver tells it to go. So here it's talking about that any thought, speech, or action we had that was not specifically divinely driven, was not specifically for God. I'm going to eat now for God. At that time, you became the chariot for sitra achra, even though it wasn't necessarily a sin, but it was not specifically godly. So we see that there's a lot of options of what we could examine and tell ourselves, you know what, let's be honest, you're complaining about that you're not feeling anything, but you've got this. This is causing a blockage, so how can I deal with this? The Zohar speaks about self-evaluation through studying the content of dreams. So obviously that goes even deeper. Someone's like, oh, all my thoughts, speech, and actions are in line. Well, okay, well, what about your dreams? And I included it so you should know that it's in the chapter, but not to get into it too much. But the general idea is that a tzaddik, when he dreams, he goes up on high, he learns Torah, his dreams are filled with Torah study, basically. So are your dreams full of Torah study? No, so because you're not where you're supposed to be. Because you think you're doing all right, but you're not. And you can see, if we have to go that far, you see in your dreams that you're not exactly where you're supposed to be. Then we have a general idea about part of how we're going to combat this or deal with this is we have the general idea of teshuva. We know that someone doesn't have to specifically sin for teshuva. Teshuva can happen at any time because it's just a reconnection to God. That's one thing. But also we can say, hey, this sin that I know is kind of still bothering me. One time I really spoke to someone like really not nice. And even though I apologized, it still really bothers me or whatever it is. Did I ever do full teshuva for it or whatever the sin is going to be? So the one we could say, maybe for yesterday that was okay, but today I'm on a new level. So today requires a new level of repentance or a new level of teshuva, we should say specifically, not necessarily repentance, but a new level of teshuva. So that's the one thing it says, that my heart was like a void within me. What is it? It's a totally beating down of it, trying to totally remove all the negative stuff that's coming out of the heart. The void is like the removal of the things. And then we also have this idea that if we could dig deeper to rise higher, it's kind of like push yourself the extra bit, which is that someone already did the teshuva for the sin per se, but that's not good enough for me anymore. I'm moving beyond that. It's the general idea. Yes, once you have teshuva for a sin, you can move on from it, but if it's an emergency situation of trying to get through the blockage, we return to all these things, and one, we have to make sure that I fully slay whatever temptation caused it, and maybe it was good enough for me yesterday, but it's not good enough for me today. Today I'm a day older, day wiser, day better than I've ever been, etc. Also, if I want to reach a new level, I could go even deeper within myself, and then I could rise even higher to a new level. Kind of by remembering my place always is kind of what it is. That will force me to dig deeper sort of situation. Now, what all this method is supposed to lead to, Hashem says, Hashem, from there I'll bring you down, says Hashem. Klipa sitracha, arrogance. We know arrogance is what caused to temptation, sin. We did that in the last couple of chapters, the 20s. So what it is that it raises itself up in arrogance. It's like this great eagle that's blocking the light of the soul. This verse about how God says, I'm going to bring you down, this is how it goes back to this whole idea of trying to humble the self and to crush the self, the physical self, the material self, the part of ourselves that's always running after materiality and physicality. That's the self we want to bring it down, as in we want to humble it, make it smaller, we want to crush it, because that's how we remove the blockage. All of this could seem like very much and kind of a little bit how are we combating this, and that's what we have here. Lefisha be'emes ein shum mamashas klal b'sitra acha. Shalachay nimshal al choshech shein bo shum mamashas klal mamela nitzcha b'pnei or. In truth, there is no substance whatsoever in the Sitra Achra. That is why it's compared to darkness, which has no substance whatsoever and is automatically banished by the presence of light. It's just an interesting point. When you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, of course. That Sitra Achra, everything that exists in the world comes from God. That also we went through in the Eternal Nashal and all the creation of the world and all this sort of stuff. There is nothing that could exist that's not Him. Even Klipa, Sitra Achra, the negative things, they come from Him. Which means that even Sitra Achra, which its job is to kind of oppose holiness, but that's because that's what it was created to be. Who created to be that? God created to be that. And God is good, God is holiness, which goes to show that even Sitra Achra, this negative force that's trying to block, because it comes from goodness, holiness, God, it's subjugated to it. Meaning, if we can humble this, if we can lessen the darkness, then that allows the light to automatically come through. It's not something that we're facing as some sort of insurmountable, like, who knows what. When we remember this is the order of the world, then we see, oh, the reason this blockage and this cloud that's coming through is because chasing the darkness for so long, and spiritual darkness, chasing material and physicality for so long, it's subsumed us. So we have to lessen the darkness, basically, and that's how the light gets through. And once the light's getting through, we're on a whole new level then. That's the general idea for that, the humbling approach. Trying to humble the self and break the self. Now, there's another thing which actually ties into this also, though. We see Sitra Achra doesn't have substance to it. The same way darkness doesn't specifically have a substance to it. That's why a little bit of light chases it away. It says another thing that we could do is that we could rage at the darkness. We could rage at the negativity in the Sitra Achra. It comes to that, it gives the example of the story about the Meraglim. So the story about the Meraglim is that we see that when the Jewish people, they came back to Meraglim, the spies gave the whole thing about, oh, we can't conquer them, blah, blah, blah. They said, Ki chazaku mimenu, ataku mimenu. Basically, they're saying, oh, the enemy is stronger than us. What they weren't saying is that the enemy is stronger than us. They're saying the enemy is stronger than him. How can we go conquer the land? How could God conquer the land for us? And all the people started crying, and there was a whole tumult, and everything was all crazy. God gets all upset at them and says, that's it, we're not going in, whatever. And then all of a sudden, 5 minutes later, the people are like, never mind, we'll go conquer the land. And it's like, well, what just happened here? How did they all of a sudden change their tune? It's not like Moshe had to do any miracles for them. There was no staff and snake and Sarah's thing. There was nothing like that going on. Why did they all of a sudden change their minds? So this is where it brings it in, that the rage at the darkness, which is person should always anger, as in arouse, make angry at the good impulse against the evil impulse, as written, rage, and sin not. We're taking this story, and what the Alter Rebbe learns from it is that because darkness has no substance, if we can unleash kind of like a controlled anger against it, that will beat it back also. They were basically going to this very honest conversation in ourselves and being very honest. How long are you going to chase after false things? And you're not going to chase after what's truth. You know what's truth in the world. You know what's real in the world. So why are you always running after everything else? And the Alter Rebbe tells us this too is a way to break through it. It's like when I had with the high schoolers, they're always arguing about why this and why that. So finally one day I'm like, that's it, everybody, close your eyes. Because I don't want you to see each other's. Close your eyes, raise your hand if you believe in God. So I think most of them did raise their hands. Now raise your hand if you think that your belief mandates some sort of action. That got a different kind of thing. It's one thing to say, oh yeah, I believe in God. Well, so do you think anything has to come from that? You say you believe in God. You say, oh, I bought into the program. I believe in all this stuff. Do your actions really reflect that? If not, all those other actions that we're running after or chasing after, this is what caused the backup to occur. This is why it's not getting through. And the longer you will indulge in, surround yourself in the darkness, basically you need a new group of what you're surrounding yourself with. You can't be upset about like, oh, why is it that when I watch a movie every single day, I only have movie scenes playing in my brain? Well, because that's what you put into your brain. What have you done to yourself? So you're saying, how come I'm not sensing spirituality? Why do I not feel God? Well, what do you do all day? Do you try to feel God all day? Or all day you're busy chasing after other things and you're like, wait a second, why don't I feel God? Very straightforward reality check. And through that, we hope, we humble, we get through the blockage and get to kind of where we need to be. It actually mentions also that because Sitra Achra comes from holiness, there's no doubt of faith of God. It's not what's occurring here. There's a blockage that's just not allowing the light shining through. It kind of describes that. Remember our original mashal of the Zona where you have the king hired a prostitute to try to tempt his son, but the prostitute doesn't want the crown prince to be some who knows what, but you want a morally upstanding kind of person. So that's the spiritual cleave, like the original source of the sleep of Sitra Achra. It's doing its job the way it's supposed to. So ultimately, it really doesn't want someone to transgress. It actually talks about that's where the source of the Nefesh Bahamas is in there. Then it has this whole thing about like, imagine if that prostitute subcontracts to another one and she subcontracts. So by the time 4 or 5 people later, the original pure intention is a little bit lost. And that kind of ends up as once the Nefesh Bahamas gets into the body. And you have the Yitzhar in the body also. Basically, there's a lot of obscuring that occurs. There's much more obscuration. So what we're trying to do is break through that. We got to break through with much examination of the self and much brutal honesty about the fact that maybe our thoughts, speech, actions really don't exactly align with where they need to be, and that's led to the situation that we're in now. There's a general idea that holiness requires humility. You have to subjugate yourself to this higher power. That's kind of what bittul is. So someone who's truly bittul would not necessarily, and we're not talking about someone who thinks of themselves as a doormat. It's actually next chapter goes into the difference between shiftless and anivus, different kinds of humility. It doesn't deal with anivus, it deals with shiftless, which is it's a much harsher kind of humility. But bittul, the healthy, the correct kind of bittul, it seems that they would not have to deal with this. They might have other issues that they're dealing with, but it doesn't seem like they're dealing with this. Because specifically what's occurring, if someone is truly bittul and they're all bittul, the light of the soul is not getting blocked by sitra achar, which is arrogance. Because bittul is it's not just, oh, I'm humble, it's the subjugation to God's will. That means that whatever I want comes secondary to what God wants. Because bittul in general removes your own self from being primary. Well, there's that, and then there is a general idea that kind of goes back to the whole teshuva thing. Sometimes to achieve greater growth, you need to have resistance. You're not necessarily ever going to truly know how much you can lift unless someone increases the weight. Yesterday, however much you lifted was fine, but today you got to be lifting more, so you're digging deeper into what you've done, but you're being less okay with everything that's been done until now because you're trying to get a higher level. You're not letting yourselves get away with stuff, I guess, more is kind of what it is. Let's reapply the teshuva level to make sure that we've totally removed any trace of it from ourselves, sort of thing. You need resistance for growth.